Welcome to Food, Health, Profits and Deception, unraveling the human diet confusion. Thanks for your interest in this topic, which affects animal welfare, the planet's health, and most importantly, I would think, your health. Peter Strauss is my name. After open heart surgery at the age of 56, I started nutritional research from scratch. I was not happy with the conflicting nutritional advice I had received in my life. I'm a technician and I do maintenance and repairs for a living. What do we need to eat to maintain our bodies in an optimum way so we get the minimum amount of repairs required and the minimum amount of sickness and live the longest? But before we move on, first a little note. This presentation is not meant to be an attack on doctors, nutritionists or dietitians. I see these professionals as doing their very best, but they also have become victims of the system we have, just like the rest of the population. It is not these professions that are at fault. The big problem is embedded in the system and culture we have. We are told that a lot of diseases are influenced by what we eat, but we are not told exactly what food is good and what food is bad for us. Alzheimer's, cancer, heart disease, strokes, diabetes, osteoporosis, and autoimmune diseases are all influenced by our diet. But what's wrong with our diet then? In this presentation we will have the following sections: an introduction to diet research science, what's wrong with processed foods, what's wrong with animal-based foods, dairy, longevity, financial interests, corruption of public health, wolves in sheep's clothing, companies and social responsibilities, and recipes and references. How to research: gut feeling or systematically, detail or big picture, what to include in our research and what not, what are the traps. We all like to work from our gut feeling. It's quicker and it takes less time and energy to achieve an outcome. But for something that has so much confusing and conflicting information around it, we really need to work systematically. Else we will simply join the confused and we will add to the existing conflicts. Should we concentrate on detail or the big picture? In science we need to look at both, the detail and the big picture. The final hypothesis or conclusion will need to fit all observations, not just a selection of it. Nutrition research, for instance, also might have to include human behavior, history, and look at economies. Looking at only detail is where I see nutrition and medical science often fall short. So we will need to include everything into our research. What are the traps? One of the traps would be that we are so emotionally attached to our food. Keep food away from me and I get pretty grumpy. We are also very social eaters. We like to eat with others and eat the same as others. We like to follow traditions. We like to fit in with others. Wishful thinking cannot be part of research if we're after the truth. There's only 3 types of food really. There's plant-based food, there's animal-based food, and there's processed food. Processed food is made from animal-based and or plant-based food, and we know it's less healthy. That leaves the question: what is the optimum for this human omnivore? Is it 50% animal-based food, 50% plants? Is it 10%, 90%? Is it 90-10? What's best? What's the best for what? Taste, tradition? Should we eat what most populations eat? Health, longevity, physical performance? Well, sugar and fats taste good, but they are not necessarily healthy. Traditionally, we've eaten an omnivore diet, but tradition does not prove this is the best. We do not really want to continue making the same mistakes as we've made in the past. By far, most populations eat an omnivorous diet, but that does not really prove either that this is the best. The majority could be wrong. We really need to look at health, longevity, and also physical performance if we want to get to the true human diet. That is the only way to get science into the research. Hence, what's the healthiest diet to eat? What diet gives us longevity and good physical performance? I will be making the argument here that our natural food is starch-based plants. So what's wrong with processed foods? What's wrong with animal-based foods? So what is wrong with processed food? we eat processed foods thanks to our brains. In our wisdom, we invented food processing. It's calorie dense, it's often full of fats and sugars, and it's nutrient poor. It lacks vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. And it's made with profits in mind and a long shelf life. It is dead food. And what is wrong then with animal-based food? Well, it's also thanks to our brains that we eat animal-based food. In our wisdom, we invented weapons, hunting and trapping. Our brains created animal husbandry and later on the Industrial Revolution, so we can eat as much animal food as we want. But we all get fat and sick. This might be part of the problem. Animal food is calorie dense and nutrient poor. Add a bit of salt to your steak and you have fats and salt. 2 of the 3 ingredients that the manufacturers get us with all the time: sugar, fat and salt. Animal food lacks vitamins, minerals and antioxidants. It only has a little bit of vitamin B12, which is something plants do not have. Let's have a closer look at what animal food contains. It contains heme iron, calcium, B12, protein, fats, and the animal's hormones. Heme iron. Studies have linked heme iron to heart disease, strokes, diabetes, lung and colon cancer. Dr. Michael Greger has a nice presentation on YouTube called The Safety of Heme versus Non-Heme Iron. It's worthwhile watching. Calcium. Dairy contains calcium, and we are told we need that. We will get back to calcium later when talking about osteoporosis and proteins. While there is some vitamin B12 in animals, it's only produced by bacteria. The reason we could get a lack of vitamin B12 eating a plant-based diet is because of our hygiene, another invention of our brains. We can simply get around that by taking a B12 tablet. Protein. While the protein in animals is the so-called complete protein because it contains all amino acids in the same ratio as we find in our bodies, this is not necessarily a healthy thing. We actually can get plenty of essential amino acids if we eat a bit of a variety of plants. We even need fewer proteins than cows, which we can see from the differences between human breast milk and cow's milk. Human breast milk contains only 1/3 of the amount of protein per calorie of what cow's milk contains. The protein story is a myth, which has been created through the observation that eating animal food makes us grow taller. We indeed grow taller on animal-based food, but that is actually not caused by the animal protein. It is caused by those animal hormones stimulating growth. It is the extra growth stimulation from eating animal food that makes us taller. The extra growth stimulation also gives us higher cancer rates though. More on that later. Countries eating a lot of animal protein have higher rates of osteoporosis. They get more broken bones and broken hips. The amino acids we find more in animal food acidify our bodies, and that leaches the calcium out. Amino acids, as Dr. McDougall says. Moving to a more plant-based diet has the potential to increase our bone density. The mainly meat and fish-eating Eskimos already had low bone densities in their 30s. Apart from the osteoporosis, there are quite a few autoimmune diseases linked to the animal protein consumption. Being very similar to our own protein, if the animal protein gets into a bloodstream, this can result in an autoimmune reaction. The animal protein can get into a bloodstream through a leaky gut, which in turn happens easily on a far from perfect diet. Both osteoporosis and those particular autoimmune diseases can show an improvement after going onto a plant-based diet. With autoimmune diseases, recovery will depend on the long-term damage sustained. A remarkable story is, for instance, from Dr. Terry Walls. She ended up bedridden but got herself walking and cycling again after changing her diet towards a not perfect but a much more plant-based diet. We are actually a low-fat species. We're not meant to eat a lot of fat or oils. We can see this from that diet that cures diabetes type 2 and it also cures heart disease. Those doctors putting their patients on a low-fat, whole plant-based diet can cure these diseases. Success rates for curing diabetes type 2 through diet is nearly 100%, while the success rate for heart disease is about 90%. Cellular fats cause the cells to be insulin resistant. If our cells do not take the sugar out of the blood, this will raise the blood sugar level. High blood sugar levels are dangerous, and this disease is called diabetes type 2. While we could regulate the blood sugar levels through minimizing that food that turns into blood sugar, i.e. the carbohydrates, we are much better off attacking the cause of the problem and going onto a fat-free diet. Health will return and our blood sugar levels will not go up anymore after eating carbohydrates because we get better. We can process carbs again. Both the high blood sugar levels and the difficulties processing carbohydrates are caused by a diet too high in fats and oils. Fats also cause atherosclerosis, the hardening and clogging up of our arteries. This can lead to strokes and heart disease. Also, atherosclerosis can be reverted by going onto a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. That both heart disease and diabetes type 2 can be reverted through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet tells us that fats are a significant part of the cause of these diseases. Meat contains about 30% of energy from fat, cheese, cheddar, about 75% of energy from fat, and brown rice has only got 10% of energy coming from fats. The plants are normally low fats. What is this low-fat whole plant-based diet? It contains grains, legumes, vegetables, some fruit, some seeds, spices, herbs, and some nuts. It does not contain meat, not contain eggs, not contain dairy, not contain fish, it does not contain seafood, and it does not contain processed foods like sugar, white flour, and oils, especially oils. What? No fish? Isn't that supposed to be healthy? Well, no. Also, fish contains cholesterol, fats, and animal hormones. The omega-3s in fish thin the blood, which on the surface appears to be great for people with clogged up arteries. So through the clogging up, the arteries get smaller, making it harder for the blood to flow through. But then the thinning of the blood through the omega-3s makes the blood runnier, so some of that lost blood flow is restored again. We are compensating one problem with the opposite effect, which is not really a good thing. Avoiding all causes of problems would be best. The people traditionally eating lots of fish, like the Eskimos and the Japanese, always had very high stroke rates. Up till 1981, strokes were the main cause of death in Japan. As their diet westernized, they got more cancers and heart disease, so now their mortality causes are the same as ours. The Eskimos also already suffered from osteoporosis in their 30s. Think about it. Warfarin, rat poison, also thins the blood. Blood thinning is not necessarily healthy, really. What about healthy fats, the essential fats? Yes, omega-3s and omega-6s are essential fats. We need some of these to sustain our health. We do not need any saturated and trans fats, as our body can produce these fats if needed, from proteins and carbohydrates. The problem we have that also these essential fats we eat in far too big quantities. A walnut a day and some leafy greens would probably cover the essential part. From a health perspective, we are a truly low-fat species. Olive oils. It takes a whopping 1,400 olives to make 1 liter of oil. It contains 9 calories per gram, which is the most energy dense you can eat. All the vitamins, minerals and antioxidants that came with the olive have been removed. It also has no fibers. It is more than twice as energy dense as sugar. Being highly refined, it definitely belongs to the processed foods. Sugars versus fats. While both are refined empty calories, the fats, the oils, contain more than twice the calorie ratios of sugar. As we saw earlier, fats and oils are the major drive behind atherosclerosis and diabetes type 2, and they slow our blood flow, as we will find out. Sugar is a major drive behind tooth decay. Having said all that, you are better off with a teaspoonful of sugar on your bowl of porridge than a smear of butter on your bread. You could consider using fruit instead of sugar, Table sugar is a disaccharide consisting of two monosaccharides. The fructose part of table sugar is mostly turned into fats in the liver. Fructose also occurs in fruit, of course. So in case of fructose, we eat sugar and end up with fats in the body. Robert Vogel's brachial artery tourniquet test has shown us that oils and fats in the food significantly slow down our blood flow. That does not help our already clogged up arteries. Reduced blood flow also does not help physical nor mental performance, of course. We move on to the animal hormones. These give us the high cancer rates. How does that work? Well, the story goes as follows. All animals contain hormones. The hormones in the other mammals we eat are the same hormones as our own, or are very similar. Some of these hormones promote growth, like estrogen, progesterone, prolactin, testosterone, IGF-1, somatropin. All these hormones naturally in the animal food have been linked to increased cancer rates. One of these hormones, estrogen, has even been labeled by the World Health Organization as a Class 1 human carcinogen, meaning that it's definitely carcinogenic. Now, just to be absolutely clear, the main drive behind the high cancer rates is not the hormones added in the meat production, it is the hormones already naturally occurring in the animal. Apart from these hormones promoting growth, there is also about 40 growth factors. These are other proteins promoting growth. One of them, VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, promotes the growth of new blood vessels. If you think about it, the growing cancer will need that blood supply to get nutrients and oxygen in order to thrive. VEGF also stimulates cancer growth. So now we have identified 40 to 50 growth-promoting factors in the animal-based food. If all that is correct, we can expect that people consuming more animal-based food get higher cancer rates. You might also be able to expect that taller or bigger people get higher cancer rates, since they already show signs of having been exposed to more growth hormones. Human growth is indeed linked to cancers. Research found within populations, the taller people get more cancers. Taller populations have higher cancer rates. Endometriosis, which is uterine tissue growing outside the uterus, has been linked to more ovarian cancer. Having bigger breasts is linked to more cancers, including breast cancer. We can see that when comparing Asian women to Caucasian women, or Asian women living in the US, Canada, or Australia versus those in Asia. Heavier people have more cancers. Heavier not only means more fat, it also means more cells, which is growth. Growth is definitely linked to more cancers. Is consuming more animal food also linked to higher cancer rates? Well, I took data from a World Health Organization's website with 27 different age standardized incident cancer rates. I took this data for 72 countries, which you find on the horizontal axis. Next, I looked up the dairy consumption per person per year, their meat consumption per person per year, and their milk yield per cow per year. All these three factors influence the amount of extra hormones we ingest. I normalized a lot, and that is what created this graph. The red line is the estimated normalized hormone load, and the blue area is the amount of affluent cancers per country. These affluent cancers were 18 out of the 27 from the website, and they all had a stronger link to the animal food. The graph shows a 7-fold difference in affluent cancer rates between those consuming a lot of meat and dairy and have a high milk yield and those that have less. This is what really convinced me that there is a strong link between the extra growth factors coming from animals and our cancers. Spontaneous remissions are rare, but when they happen, they are consistently linked to a diet that's much more plant-based, or linked to times in our lives when hormone levels come down, like the menopause or after removal of certain glands. We can find stories of people getting better with cancer while eating the macrobiotic diet, the living foods diet, the raw diet, and also the McDougall diet. What all these have in common is that they are plant-based. Dr. Kelly Turner did her PhD on spontaneous remissions. She wrote a book about her experiences, which is called Radical Remissions. For her research, she talked to over 130 people that had experienced spontaneous remissions and researched over 1,000 cases in the literature. She came up with a list of common factors amongst cancer survivors, and indeed one of them was eating a much more plant-based diet. She stated a powerful line: "If we want to win the war on cancer, we need to learn from those that have already won." The way I see these hormones is that they do not cause DNA damage and cause cancer that way, but their growth promotion makes it much harder for our own cancer defense mechanisms, like apoptosis and T cells, to fight off the cancers. Hence, while these hormones are not strictly causing cancer, they cause the high cancer rates through upsetting the natural hormonal balance in our bodies. Through the growth stimulation, they give cancers much more chance to develop into a problem than would have been the case without them. A special note on dairy. Dairy is likely the biggest factor in our affluent cancers. This is caused by the way we farm. Calves need to grow up fast, hence hormone levels will naturally be higher in cow's milk than in human milk, and that while we are the only species taking milk from another animal. It doesn't appear to be a natural thing to do in the first place. We milk the cows while pregnant, so we do not end up with feeding the animals and not get any returns. During pregnancy, hormone levels go up, and some of this ends up in the milk. The biggest factor, however, is probably us selecting cows for a high milk yield. The milk yield is controlled by hormones, so we end up selecting for higher hormone levels. There is research telling us that modern dairy can have estrogen levels up to 33 times the natural ones, and progesterone levels up to 8 to 10 times as high. Estrogen has been labeled by the World Health Organization as a Class 1 human carcinogen. The affluent age standardized incident cancer rates in the Netherlands are 364, and in Greece are about half that, 189. The differences were not in meat or dairy consumption, but in the way the milk is produced. The Greeks get their dairy much more from sheep and goats, and their milk yield per cow per year is about half that of the Dutch. This gives the impression that just the way dairy is produced is responsible for 50% of the affluent cancers. The total dairy contribution will have to be even higher. Next, we will look at longevity. If we get less sick, will we live longer? Indeed, that is the case. The Canadian-born brothers Craig and Bradley Wilcox researched why people on Okinawa, Japan, have such high life expectancies. Japan is the record on the planet, but the Okinawans get another 6 years on top of that. Why is that? Well, the Wilcox brothers came up with a list of reasons, one of which was indeed eating much more plant-based. Another longevity researcher is Dan Buettner. With his team, Dan has done a lot of work for National Geographic. He found pockets of longevity on Okinawa, Icaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in California. Again, one of the factors they found was eating a much more plant-based diet. The people in Loma Linda, California that live about 6 years longer than the other Americans belong to a group of Seventh-day Adventists. They read in their Bible that they should eat from the Garden of Eden, which they interpret as eating more plants. Many of them are vegetarians and quite a few are vegans. Well, the big question comes, why haven't you heard this before? Why don't our doctors and nutritionists know this? Why doesn't the Minister of Health know this? Well, if it is correct that from a health perspective we are plant eaters, that has enormous financial implications for the processed food industry, for the dairy industry, for the meat industry, for the poultry industry, for the egg industry, for fisheries, for the health industry, and for the pharmaceutical industry. Let's have a look for corruption of public health. We will look at politicians, dietary guidelines, Dietitians Association of Australia, the tobacco industry, and the health industry. First, we will look at politicians. Their election funds often come from the industry. The industry also seeks access to our political leaders through their lobbying activities. Can we really expect our politicians to lead the country with only the public's well-being in mind? Do we really think the industry forks out money out of kind-heartedness? PCRM, which is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, has sued the American government 3 times so far for being industry biased and not putting people's health first. Twice they've won, and 1 court case is still ongoing. Well, that was America. But what in Australia? Adelaide's Jeff Russell has written a book about our national science organisation, specifically about this year's IRO's best-selling total well-being diet. According to Jeff, one not only loses weight on this diet, one also loses health and lifespan, damages the planet and causes unnecessary cruelty to animals. Jeff's arguments come from research done by organisations like the World Health Organization, but also even from the CSIRO itself. From my own research, Jeff is perfectly right. The pressure has been on government agencies for years to find private funding, resulting in the science produced becoming biased in favour of the private industry. As Jeff points out with the cover of his book Perfidy, blind faith in even our public science organisation is not a healthy thing anymore. Of course, this is not really science. This is public manipulation by a government organisation under a scientific cloak. The Dietitians Association of Australia sponsors producing almonds, avocados, dairy, breakfast cereals, and also Meat and Livestock Australia, Campbell's, Arnott's, olive producers, egg producers, etc. Can we really get independent advice from them? What's worse, accredited practicing dietitian is the only credential recognised by the Australian Government, Medicare, the Department of Veteran Affairs and most private health funds as the quality standard for nutrition and dietetic services in Australia. The quality standard of being corrupted, the way I see it. To me, this looks like institutionalised corruption. As far as I am concerned, if you really want healthy dietary advice from a dietitian, seek help from an independent dietitian that is not associated with this organisation that appears to be just an extension of the food industry. Better still, do your own research, but that is a lot of work. Nutrition Australia has, amongst others, the dairy industry as a so-called corporate partner. That means, again, we cannot expect independent advice from Nutrition Australia. The tobacco industry produces a product that's carcinogenic and has no benefits for mankind. Alan Brandt, in his book The Cigarette Century, estimates that 100 million people died prematurely in the last century from tobacco-related illnesses. Currently, the industry produces more cigarettes than ever before, exporting more to the third world as the Western countries slowly wake up to its dangers. Instead of stopping the production of this evil product, the industry is conning future victims to step into its trap. 100 million victims are more victims than all the victims of the First and Second World Wars together, and we are doing very little against these evil forces. We're not sacrificing any lives of our young men to fight this evil like happened in World War I and World War II. In reality, we are looking at offering the young men's lives and others for this evil. And all that while we think of ourselves as highly civilized. The 100 million victims died thanks to our belief in capitalism, as this is part of our justification for not taking any action. We do not see it as assisting suicide, but it is a form of assisted suicide, isn't it? Is the tobacco industry into science and fair play? The lung cancer smoking link was already suspected in the mid-1930s. But there was a big denial and resistance supported and driven by the tobacco industry. Science firmly established in the 1950s up till 1964 that given all evidence, tobacco was indeed the most likely cause of most lung cancers. The industry started the Tobacco Institute in 1958 to support their cause. Later this became the Tobacco Industry Research Council. Officially they were supporting the lung cancer research, but in practice their grants all went to research that looked for any other possible lung cancer cause but tobacco. Later they changed their name again to the Council for Tobacco Research. In 1994, more than 30 years after science firmly established the undisputable links between smoking and lung cancer, 7 tobacco industry CEOs denied in an American court the lung cancer and smoking link. In their opinion, it did not exist. Total denial is the name of the game. Let's have a look at the health industry. Here we see a table with life expectancies at birth of different countries. Vietnam is 76, China 75, South Korea 82, Australia 83, and the USA 79. This is a variation of 8 years, or about 10%. Let's add the healthcare costs to this. The healthcare costs per capita vary enormously between $111 for Vietnam and $9,146 for the USA. That is 82 times as high. And that while the life expectancy does not vary that much, as we just saw. Also between South Korea and Australia, we see a significant difference. The Australians spent more than 3 times as much on health per capita as the Koreans and achieve virtually the same life expectancy. If we remove the effects of infant and childhood mortalities, the life expectancy differences between the USA and Vietnam become even less. Once a Vietnamese reaches the age of 5, he can expect to live till 78. In the USA, one can expect to live till 80 if you get to 5. The associated healthcare costs do not appear to be related to life expectancy at all. We live longer nowadays because of our hygiene, sanitation, immunization, and antibiotics. However, we get more chronic diseases because of our increased animal food consumption. With the Industrial Revolution, we can now eat as much animal food as we like. Indeed, the consumption has increased enormously over the last 60 years. The capitalist system will suck out as much money from the population as the population is able and prepared to pay for health. There is no money to be made from neither the dead nor the healthy. The money is in between. The money comes from the sick. As long as we have a system that pays for treating the sick rather than getting paid for people being healthy, we will have forces in the system aiming at keeping or making us sick. Some call this a disease care system rather than a healthcare system. Economic rationalism does not always make sense from a social aspect, nor from an efficiency aspect for that matter, as its viewpoint is far too narrow. Wolves in sheep's clothing. In this section we will look at groups claiming they are interest groups for osteoporosis, diabetes, heart disease and cancer. First we will look at Osteoporosis Australia. They tell us we can prevent osteoporosis through calcium intake, vitamin D and exercise. They do not tell us that we are acidifying our bodies through consuming animal protein and causing bone loss that way. They're not telling us that our bone density can be restored through moving towards a plant-based diet. While they tell us we need sunshine for vitamin D production, the Cancer Council tells us sunshine causes skin cancers. What do we need to do? We are getting conflicting information. Do we need sunshine for vitamin D, or do we need to stay away from sunshine since it causes cancers? They are not telling us that populations eating more plant-based have less broken bones. They're not telling us success stories of individuals moving towards a plant-based diet and increasing their bone density. They're not telling us the other health benefits of a plant-based diet. Diabetes. Diabetes Australia states on their website that there is no cure. Well, for 10% of the diabetes type 1 patients, that is true. But for the type 2 patients, which is 90% of all diabetes, that is plainly incorrect. We will see later doctors curing diabetes through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. Diabetes Australia leads us up the garden path. Diabetes Australia mentions risk factors on the website. This is a confusing presentation of diabetes risk factors. They list 6. 4 of which are diet related, but they do not state exactly what in the diet is wrong. Diabetes Australia has dietary guidelines. These refer to the Australian dietary guidelines. We already saw the CSIRO, our National Science Institution, corrupting dietary advice. We also saw the American dietary guidelines being corrupted by industry interests. Would the Australian dietary guidelines be any better? Diabetes Australia talks about managing diabetes, not about a cure. They talk about a diet lower in fat, particularly saturated fats. That raises questions like, how low is low? And why has saturated fat been singled out? All fats contribute to diabetes. The less fat you eat, the better off you are. The last thing on this page is what really annoys me. They state matching the amount of food you eat with the amount of energy you burn through activity and exercise is important. That puts the blame of the diabetes onto you. You have not exercised enough and you have eaten too much. There's no truth in that, because it's not the amount you eat that's wrong, it's what you eat that's wrong. But telling you this goes against industry interests. Diabetes Australia has on their website, through leadership, prevention, management and research, Diabetes Australia is committed to reducing the impact of diabetes. Yes, they're leading us to industry profits. There is no money in dietary advice. There is heaps of constant money coming from sick people. In fact, it would appear that good dietary advice is the biggest competitor of most of our industries. WebMD is another one of those supporting the industry. It's privately funded and not independent. They mention that 1 in 3 Americans is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Is that normal? They do not mention that removing all fats from the diet will get people better. Question. If countries on the planet eating much more of a low-fat, whole plant-based diet have much less diabetes type 2, and also if multiple different doctors can cure diabetes type 2 through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet, why is this diet not recommended by Diabetes Australia? Next, we will look at the Heart Foundation. The Heart Foundation has a list of attributable risk factors. All the ones in red are dietary related. So what is it in our diet that causes our problems? If the Heart Foundation identified so many dietary related risk factors for heart disease, why do they not work out what it is in our diet that is wrong? The Heart Foundation recommends some oily and fatty food, meat and low-fat dairy and fish. But doctors are curing people from heart disease through a starch-based, low-fat, whole plant-based diet. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn cured many people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. His patients' cholesterol levels come down, their blood pressure comes down, their diabetes type 2 disappears, weight comes down, and the arteries open up. Here is what 32 months on a low-fat, whole plant-based diet can do for your coronary arteries. On the left we see a particularly clogged up artery, and on the right we see the same artery after only 32 months on the diet. Dr. Dean Ornish cured many people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. Their cholesterol levels come down, their blood pressure comes down, their diabetes type 2 disappears, their weight comes down, their arteries open up. He is nowadays paid by the American Medicare and also by many private health funds for his lifestyle intervention of heart disease. Dr. John McDougall cured many people from heart disease through a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. His patients' cholesterol levels come down, their blood pressure comes down, diabetes type 2 disappears, their weight comes down, the arteries open up. He teaches staff and corporations about health achieved through lifestyle, as this is much cheaper than the corporations paying insurance premiums for their staff. The efforts of Dr. McDougall to make the world a better place are truly enormous. Nathan Pritikin is really the pioneer in curing heart disease through diet. He was the first person to cure himself from heart disease through basically a low-fat, whole plant-based diet in the early 1960s. He was not a doctor but an engineer that went a different path than his 10-plus cardiologists suggested, and he found himself being better off. His cholesterol levels came down and his blood pressure came down. Here is a section from an article on Alexander Ignatovsky, a pioneer in the study of atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is at the base of most of our heart disease. The article states, research into the causes of atherosclerosis began in 1907, when Alexander Ignatovsky began to feed rabbits a diet of full-fat milk, eggs and meat. Rabbits fed with animal proteins soon developed pronounced atherosclerosis of the aorta. So this is what happens. You feed a herbivore animal-based food and the arteries start to clog up. We already knew this in 1907 according to this article on the American National Institute of Health's website. The disease patterns between these rabbits and human beings are pretty clear. And this is really what points also to our own problems being dietary induced. Question. If countries on the planet eating much more of a low-fat whole plant-based diet have much less heart disease, if atherosclerosis, the underlying precursor of heart disease, is caused in rabbits through feeding them an animal-based diet, and also if multiple different doctors can cure heart disease through a pure low-fat whole plant-based diet, why is this diet not recommended by the Heart Foundation? Cancer. It was mentioned before that the following plant-based diets have been linked to overcoming cancer: the macrobiotic diet, the living foods diet, the raw diet, and the McDougall diet. Dr. Kelly's research on spontaneous remissions being linked to a plant-based diet was also mentioned. Here is Australia's Cancer Council recommending meat up to 3 or 4 times per week, plus fish, plus poultry, plus yogurt, cheese and milk. Here is the World Health Organization telling us again that meat is a Class 2A carcinogen. It is probably carcinogenic to humans, with associations with colon cancer, pancreatic cancer and prostate cancer. Question. If populations on the planet eating less animal foods get less affluent cancers, and if sometimes cancer patients moving towards a plant-based diet manage to overcome their cancers, and if the World Health Organization labels red meat as probably carcinogenic, why does the Cancer Council of Australia recommend red meat 3 to 4 times a week, plus consuming poultry and dairy on top of this? For a full analysis of affluent cancer rates using the Bradford-Hill criteria that were also used to link smoking to lung cancer, see the presentation Affluent Cancers and Diet, Unraveling the Confusion on YouTube. Let's look at financial links. Osteoporosis Australia. On their websites we find sponsors from the pharmaceutical, biotechnological, healthcare, medical imaging companies and supplement manufacturers. Diabetes Australia. Diabetes Australia has many sponsors from healthcare and pharmaceutical companies. The Heart Foundation. The Heart Foundation has many sponsors from pharmaceutical companies. Here we see the pharmaceutical company Pfizer boasting about its so-called generosity towards these so-called not-for-profit organizations. All the pharmaceutical companies spent much more on marketing than on research. Here's a Pfizer list of 20 not-for-profit organizations they sponsor in Australia. One of them is also the Heart Foundation. Well, we could not find this back on the Heart Foundation's website. I guess people could conclude from your list of sponsors that your loyalties are not with the people, but with the industry. Cancer Council of Australia has Coles Express and Flybuys as partners. also curbs women's fitness and nutrition. Would we get independent advice from the Cancer Council? Just on one day alone, Daffodil Day 2014, Coles raised $2.8 million for the Cancer Council. Coles will be the major corporate sponsor by far for the Cancer Council. Companies and social responsibility. We have a look at the tobacco industry and the health industry. The tobacco industry produces a carcinogenic product. Smoking claimed 100 million victims in the last century. The tobacco industry is in eternal denial about the dangers of smoking. The tobacco industry currently produces more cigarettes than ever before, exporting to the third world. Despite the dangers to public health, we have not seen one factory closure or one CEO wanting to close their factory. The first signs of linking smoking to lung cancer came in the 1930s, but because the industry put up a big long fight, it took till around 1960 for science to thoroughly link smoking to lung cancer. In 1994, 7 tobacco company CEOs in court stated under oath that they did not think tobacco caused any harm. The tobacco industry only supported research supporting the sales of tobacco. Public relations, or in other words, public manipulation, is more important than truth, honesty, and in the end, public lives. Let's move on to the health industry. With similar life expectancies, we see big differences in healthcare costs per capita. Profits are the motivation, and the capitalist system will get as much money out of the public as it can. As countries get richer, the health industry can extract more from the public, and as we can see, they do this very successfully. We saw before that the difference in healthcare costs per person per year between communist Vietnam and capitalist USA are enormous. Sorry USA, but also when it comes to healthcare costs, you are losing from these commies. Concentrating on capital only does not necessarily lead to efficiencies. As a matter of fact, it looks like it can be grossly inefficient at times. From a healthcare cost perspective, it certainly looks like the capitalist approach needs a big review. Naomi Klein, in her book, This Changes Everything, argues that from a climate perspective too, capitalism needs a big review. She argues that it is the corruptive influence of capitalism that's controlling the destruction of our planet. Not-for-profit organizations like the Heart Foundation, Diabetes Australia and the Cancer Council are there for somebody else's profit. They are there for research industries, and they're there for pharmaceutical industries, and they support the food industries as well. The social responsibilities of the industries are for the shareholders only. We call those social responsibilities financial responsibilities. The devil is in the detail. The details are only now coming to light. Details like more tobacco industry victims than the First and Second World Wars together. Details like the competitive nature of capitalism creating the obesity crisis through concocting foods that increase the stomach share. No other animal on their natural diet gets too fat from too much food. It is the unnatural diet that is the real problem. The industry tries to tell us a different picture, of course, putting the blame on us, running away from any responsibility. What appear to be the tactics of the industry? They keep us distracted with amusement and games. They keep us focused on short-term self-interest rather than the common good. They keep us malinformed and confused. And they hurt people like the cattle through scare tactics and misinformation. They milk the public's wallets as if they were cows' udders on an industrialized farm. In order to do that, the industry needs to have some control of our political, social and scientific movements. It needs to have control of the media, the TV, the internet, the teaching institutions, our teachers and our leaders. Looking at the corruption discovered, they are doing very well. However, we end up with a population that does not reach its full potential, is often fat and sick and suffers unnecessarily. In summary, we've created a monetary-focused society that has lost the long-term and common good perspectives. When it comes to chronic diseases, our doctors in medicine are in effect an extension of the pharmaceutical industry. If the doctor suspects healthier eating might give relief of the problems, he passes the patient on to a dietitian, as doctors in medicine do not receive much, if any, nutritional schooling. The dietitian, in turn, is in effect an extension of the meat and dairy industries. The industries have got us cornered. By far the biggest competitor for the industries is good science and a healthy diet, and the industries have done well to steer us away from just that. Our doctors, nutritionists, dietitians and ourselves are all victims of our own weaknesses for sugars, salt and fat. This is exploited by the industries, who are not intending to do us any harm, but they're just after profits. Unfortunately, their profits get in the way of our health. We are also victims of us seeking leaders that we hope create a better outcome and save us from having to research ourselves. Unfortunately, profits get in the way of an efficient and effective public health system too. The cigarette industry did not deliberately kill 100 million people in the last century. They too were just after profits. The death toll was just an unwanted side effect. The health industries did not deliberately set out to create very inefficient systems. They are just unwanted side effects of them seeking profits. Somebody has to pay for these profits. Smokers pay with their money, and often with shortened lives. And the other industries are really not much different. It's just the nature of the beast. Corruption, disrespect and selfishness are the enemies of civilization, and that is what unregulated industry stands for. Kim Williams, president of the American College of Cardiology, is a vegan for health reasons. The historically human omnivore, from a health perspective, is actually a herbivore. He will get enough proteins, iron and calcium on a diet low in fat, existing of whole plants. The only thing missing will be B12, but a supplement can easily fix that. It is likely that from a health perspective, no animal roaming the earth is an omnivore. It is thanks to developing a brain that we got the dietary-wise lost and ended up in this bad spot. It's thanks to the industry's financial interests that we are kept here. Former President Bill Clinton became a vegan after serious heart problems. The world is slowly changing. We need pure science to come back to our education and medical systems. Doctors really should study health before studying diseases and medicine. There is much more to health than diseases and medicines, as we now know, thanks to Dr. McDougall, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. Barnard, Pritikin and others. The problem we have is that financial interests are stopping logic and science from being there for the population and the planet's future. Here is a bundle of diseases that are strongly influenced by processed foods and animal-based foods. Obesity, heart attacks, the basis of which is atherosclerosis, which also causes macular degeneration, forms of dementia, kidney diseases, pulmonary embolism and more. Strokes, affluent cancers, diabetes type 2, osteoporosis, hypertension, raised cholesterol levels, autoimmune diseases like diabetes type 1, Crohn's disease, MS, lupus and arthritis. If you are after recipes or more information, you can get them from these websites. They also have lots of information and references on the subjects approached here. Here you see general references and references on calcium osteoporosis, diabetes type 2 and heart disease. And here are references on autoimmune diseases, cancer, dairy and corruption. So what's the healthiest to eat and what's the least healthy to eat? Looking at the nutrient density, the amount of proteins, calcium, iron, vitamins per calorie, we get the following table. Raw foods, leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables are very high in nutrients per calorie, in other words, very nutrient dense. After that there are cooked vegetables, fruits, grains and seeds, And the last ones are the nuts and the oily seeds. If we assess commonly consumed food from the potential to cause diabetes type 2, heart disease or cancer, we can assemble the following list going from least poisonous to most poisonous. White flour and sugar just miss nutrients, although sugar is not great for teeth. The oils do damage to the blood flow, cause diabetes type 2 and atherosclerosis, like heart disease. Fish, meat and dairy all contain oils or fats, and hence they all affect diabetes type 2 and atherosclerosis. They also contain the animal's hormones and contribute to the high cancer rates. Modern industrially produced dairy is likely the strongest cancer promoter. Cheese in turn is concentrated dairy. Being a plant eater makes sense from an animal welfare perspective. It also makes sense from a climate perspective, as methane from cattle is responsible for the biggest part of the greenhouse gas increases we have. Hence, the quickest effect you can have on climate change is to start eating plant-based. It has an even bigger effect than getting rid of your car. And it makes sense also from the health perspective. We have a choice. We can do what most others do, or we can be sensible. Any questions, send me an email. If I know the answer, I will let you know. Thanks and the very best of health. My name is Peter Strauss. Goodbye.